Hi guys, welcome back. Did I fool you? Hey there, I'm gonna go in the corner now. We're gonna get started. Yes, we are doing vertebrates. That's why my buddy over here with the vertebrae down the back is here. So you remember, vertebrates are part of the chordate phylum. And we're gonna go through this in 2 different videos today. So I'm gonna go fast and we're gonna do part 1 and then you probably wanna watch part 2. So, members of the chordate phylum. We already know about chordates. Watch the other video if you don't. Not all chordates are vertebrates, but most of them are. So vertebrates have backbones. That means they have vertebrae. We know what those vertebrae are. We studied those a lot when we did the skeletal system. All vertebrates have backbones to protect that spinal cord. So the skeleton of all vertebrates starts out as cartilage. When a developing vertebrate is an embryo, all skeletons start as cartilage, and we saw that with us, where human babies have the skeleton of cartilage that then it turns into bone, and even young babies have a lot more cartilage, and then as we grow up, and we can see it here with these hands of these boys, they get more and more bone. The cartilage turns into bone or ossifies. Most vertebrates grow, the cartilage is replaced by bone. Because bone is so hard, it can be fossilized, and that is what is so cool, because we have all these fossils of vertebrates, so it's told us a whole lot about the relationships between these different types of vertebrates and the vertebrates that have been around in the past. So we've gotten lots of valuable information from these fossils. So, first off, there are 5 main groups of vertebrates. As we talked about in chordates, there are some non-vertebrate chordates, but the vertebrates all have backbones, and those 5 groups would be fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Now we're going to go into those in a little bit more detail here and find out that these groupings have a lot of interesting characteristics in each one. So let's start here before we actually dive into each one, talking about something that causes a lot of confusion. You hear a lot about warm-blooded and cold-blooded. Well, I'm introducing these terms today, endotherm and ectotherm. Maybe you know those terms already, but an endotherm is what you might think of as warm-blooded, and ectotherm is what you might think of as cold-blooded. Therm means heat, ecto means outside, endo means inside. So let's make some sense of this. So first off, endotherms. Endotherms are things like birds and mammals. They warm their body by capturing the heat that's released by the chemical reactions in their cells. All those chemical reactions, all those things like cellular respiration, they release heat. And they keep that heat in. How do they keep that heat in? Ooh, things like fur and feathers and fat. All that's insulation. It keeps that heat in. So these endotherms have a fairly constant body temperature. Your body temperature stays around 98 degrees. It might be a little above, a little below. It might even go up like 4 degrees, but it's not changing a whole lot, right? These organisms can live in cold environments. And think about that. Think about who lives in the Alaskan tundra. Well, there's a lot of caribou there. There's even some wolves. There's some polar bears, and there's some birds. But are there any amphibians? Are there any reptiles? Now, these are sometimes called warm-blooded, and that's okay as long as you understand it, but realize that ectotherms can sometimes also have what we think of as warm blood. An ectotherm, most fish, amphibians, and reptiles are ectotherms. They do not control their body temperature through chemical reaction in cells. What they do is their body temperature changes with the temperature of their environment. They will behaviorally change their body temperature sometimes by like sitting on a warm rock in the sun or under the heat lamp, and that will raise their body temperature. They're sometimes called cold-blooded, even though you need to realize that they can have very warm blood. If they're at a very warm spot, their body temperature is going to be pretty high, but if they're in a very cold spot, their body temperature is going to be pretty low. Okay, so warm-blooded animals are known as endotherms. Their body temperature stays the same whether it's cold or hot outside. Ectotherms are, get this out of the way, cold-blooded animals. Their body temperature depends on whether it's cold or hot outside. Their temperature changes with the temperature around them. Okay, so we're going to use that to help differentiate and understand some of these different vertebrates. First vertebrate group that we're going to do are fish. Now, fish were the first vertebrates. They live in very nearly every single aquatic habitat imaginable. If you find some standing water that's there for a long time, you're most likely going to find some fish in there. They are aquatic, meaning they live in the water. They're vertebrates. Their characteristics are they have fins, they have scales, and they have gills. They were the first vertebrates to evolve about 500 million years ago. We have good fossil evidence of that. Now, these fish need oxygen, just like your cells need oxygen, they need oxygen, and they get that oxygen through their gills. The water runs over their gills, as we see here, and then the oxygen diffuses into their blood. Their gills are full of blood. That's why they're all red like that. And the oxygen diffuses in, just like it diffuses into your blood and your lungs, but here it just diffuses into the blood as it runs over the gills. Okay? Most fish are egg-laying. However, there are definitely some live-bearing fish. Okay. The first class of fish are called the jawless fish. Now, you can probably understand where they get that name, but you might say, well, looks like they have a jaw. There they are. Isn't that their jaw? Well, that's their mouth. And they do have a mouth, indeed, but they don't have a jaw. If you think about what the jaw is the the part that we chew with and we talk with. It's that movable mandible. That's our jaw. These guys don't have that. They just have an open mouth there, and they can't open and close that. Okay, they have mouths of soft tissue, no true teeth. They have some little things on there. So the jawless fish are the lampreys and the hagfish. And I would love to talk to you about these guys even more, but and please do look them up. They're really, really cool. But we're going to jump on a little bit, and I just want to show you a picture of sort of how they're used. Lamprey are found in Alaska, in the rivers, in the Yukon, etc., and they are used for native food, and they're also used to feed sled dogs and things like that. So hagfish are not so much in Alaska, but they are oceanic, and there are some here, but they're being fished more. They're actually being used as good food for things like fish and chips. But I wanted to show you, they're also called slime eels. They're so cool. They release all this slime, and it's a way for them to protect themselves. Now, these guys don't have a backbone as an adult. They do earlier on, so they're very, very flexible. And they don't have true bones. They only have cartilage. Now, that gets us to thinking about these guys a little bit. So first off, these fish, these jawless fish, there used to be a lot of jawless fish around. If you look at this chart here, you'll see it goes back in time. It goes to long ago, 500 million years ago, and up here is now. And if you look at these diagrams here, these are the different types of fish in each sort of class of fish. And here, or these are all jawless fishes, all in the same class, but these different groups within the classes. And you can see that there were lots of different types of jawless fish. But if you look at this, so let's look at Conodonta, you'll see there were lots of them for hundreds of millions of years, and then all of a sudden they stop. Well, they became extinct about 200 million years ago. Prior to that, though, there were a lot more. I mean, a lot of them got extinct about 350 million years ago. The only ones that are still existing are the hagfish and the lamprey, of those many jawless fish that once existed, and that's what we find that all out through fossils. Now, the next type of fish I want to talk to you about, many of you are very familiar with these. These are cartilaginous fish, and you probably know why they're called cartilaginous fish. And here's a cool little X-ray to help you understand why they're called cartilaginous fish. This is called a small-tooth sawfish. Has this really cool saw that it uses in the mud, and it sort of scrapes the mud up a little bit, and then it sucks up the clams and things like that with that mouth that's underneath. But what you'll see here is it does indeed have a skeleton, but this skeleton is made of cartilage. Their skeleton never turns to bone. Cartilaginous fish do not have bony skeletons. They do have cartilaginous skeletons. Who's the cartilaginous fish? Sharks, skates, and rays. Those are the cartilaginous fish. We're very familiar with lots of them. Notice they have a jaw, and they're very famous for their jaw. Sometimes their jaw is used to take out poor little sea lions as a meal or something. Sometimes their jaw is used to open up wide so those gill rakers can filter out all the plankton in this basking shark. They have strong jaws. They're very good swimmers. They don't have a swim bladder, and we'll talk to you about that in a little bit more. They have excellent senses of sight and smell. They have a lateral line system allowing them to feel when things are to their sides, feel changes in the water. They have ampullae of Lorenzini, which allow them to pick up electrical charges in the water, allowing them to be very effective hunters. And their skin is covered with these denticles. Now, denticles are not scales. They are actually like teeth on there. If you've ever felt shark skin, very, very sharp if you go the wrong direction, which is very interesting in itself and makes them be very efficient swimmers. So, cartilaginous fish is one group of fish. Another group of fish is bony fish. Well, guess what bony fish have? Yeah, you guessed it. They got bones. So in this butterfly fish, you can see the X-ray of the bones. What you can see is they've got that vertebrae. They've got those all those bones that we're familiar with. And then also notice all those rays in the fins. Now, not all bony fish have that, but these are called ray-finned bony fish, and they do. And that's very interesting in itself. So bony fish, the majority of all fish are bony fish. Salmon, halibut, goldfish, these are all bony fish. Bony fish are covered with scales. Now, their scales can vary in sizes. Sometimes they're very big, sometimes they're very, very small, but they do have scales. They also have a swim bladder, and that swim bladder is almost like a little balloon inside it they can put gases into, and that balloon can help them float at any level in the water. This is why you can see fish sort of staying at one level and not swimming or not going up and down, whereas cartilaginous fish can't do that. So the bony fish have this swim bladder, and if you've ever pulled up like a rockfish from really deep and you think it's stomach coming out, that's actually the swim bladder, because those gases in there, as that pressure gets released, expand and it gets pushed out. Now, there's two types of bony fish. There's the ray-finned bony fish, like the butterfly fish I showed you in this salmon up here. You can see the rays in their fins. But then there's also lobe-finned bony fish. And these lobe-finned bony fish, if you look at their fins here, you'll see that they look like lobes. They almost look like little legs. And sometimes, indeed, these fish actually use these fins to sort of walk across the mud, maybe from one drying up lake to another. And that's very interesting, because that may well have led to our next group of vertebrates. Okay, next group of vertebrates is amphibians. Now, amphibians, these guys, oh, they're so cool. Look at that smooth skin. Look at their structure. They definitely are vertebrates. They've got bones. Their amphibian means double life. They start their life in the water. They then basically move to land. They live in both land and water, or water and land, but they start out fish-like. You think of a tadpole. Their eggs have to hatch in the water. The adults are terrestrial carnivores, catching their food on land. So the young, they use gills. The tadpoles, they use gills, but as adults, they use lungs. They're adapted to be on land. Amphibians first appeared about 360 million years ago. They are ectotherms. Their body temperature is dependent upon their surroundings, things like frogs and salamanders. We do have one in Alaska, the wood frog, the only amphibian that we have here, which actually can allow itself to freeze over the winter, which is pretty darn handy for it, because otherwise it wouldn't make it. And then here's a Sicilian, that thing that looks like a snake or a worm. It's, in fact, a very, very interesting amphibian. Okay, so you're probably familiar with the frog life cycle, and it's very important to understand that amphibian eggs have to be in the water. They have to stay wet. Amphibians are tied to water. They can't go far from water. Their eggs have to be laid in the water. The eggs then hatch, and they have a water-based form, that tadpole form, and then that goes through metamorphosis, and then they become more of this land-based animal. But amphibians are still really tied to being near water. They couldn't be in a very dry area, because one, they have very thin skin, they would dry out, but also their eggs have to be in the water, so they're tied to the water. Okay, so that leads us to our next group, which doesn't have to be tied to the water, the reptiles. Now, reptiles, they have scales. They have dry, scaly skin. What's the function of these scales? These scales protect their skin from drying out. They keep the water in. They protect the body from drying out. They also have what we call terrestrial eggs. Terrestrial eggs means that the eggs have a shell on them. They can lay their eggs on land. Well, that's huge, because now these guys aren't tied to water so much. Reptiles, they breathe using lungs their whole time. They're born with lungs. They breathe in the air. They are also ectotherms. Their body temperature changes with the climate. And you know what these are: turtles, tortoises, lizards, snakes, and of course the dinosaurs were reptiles. Oh, they're so cool. Yes, Oogie is indeed a reptile. Your bearded dragon is a reptile. Lizards, we get some really cool things that are also reptiles. Now, that leads us, if you look carefully at these, you'll see that they have these cool scales on them. And it might get you to think about that, because look at that scale, and then look at these scales. Oh, look at that right there. This looks very similar. Well, these guys are the next group. And where'd they come from? They came from reptiles. Okay, I'm going to pause it right there, and we're going to go to a second video, but you might get your notes caught up, and then we'll finish up on the next video. Thank you. See you soon.